Well, hello and welcome to a very bite-sized discussion on Teacher PD that promotes diversification and equality. Here is a brief outline of what I'd like to talk about today. I'm going to begin first of all by looking at the definitions for diversification and equality. And then we're going to take a little dive into what research tells us about PD models and diversification and equality. And then I'd like to share some ideas for promoting diversification and equality in PD. And I'll finish off with a short reflection. And if I can keep saying those two words as clear as that all the way through, I'm probably doing quite a good job because I have a habit of stumbling. But anyway, here we go. And just before I launch, these are my session aims. So I really would like to try and shine a light on our topic today and maybe encourage some further discussion, exploration and experimentation beyond today. So just before I share the definitions that I've been pulling out of the literature myself, can I ask you just take a moment to think about what you think diversification and equality might mean to you in terms of teachers' profession development. If you want to, feel free to share them on the chat, although I can't actually see it on my screen at the moment, but have a moment to think about it and then I'll show you what I have. So hopefully you've got one or two ideas in your mind. Let's turn to diversification first. So to pull out a quick dictionary definition, this is what Cambridge tells us. I think it's a really good starting point. And I feel that means to me that we need to start embracing change. And if we embrace change, then I believe we also need to be open-minded and willing to experiment. And really, to say it simply, we need to be prepared just to do things differently and to try things out differently. But what does equality mean? I've got a problem with my, Mariam, I think I've got your picture, okay. So equality. Every person matters, every teacher matters whenever we put together a PD session. We need to think about being inclusive and not exclusive. So we want everyone to have a voice. And I think this last definition from Lexico really sums it up. So we need to think about everybody having equal status, equal rights and equal opportunities. And these definitions I would like to use as the backdrop for the rest of what I'm going to talk about today. So I'm going to move on to talk about what research tells us and specifically look at the two common approaches to teacher PD that we talk about, one being top down and the other being bottom up. So if we look at top down as a prism, it's a macro approach, which means that it's usually led by an institution like somebody, it could be university, it could be a Ministry of Education, a group of colleges, or indeed a school. It's led by the parent institution, which means that the content is usually decided from a central point. And this often means that it's not always relevant to everybody, unfortunately. This in turn can lead to a real lack of motivation and it trigger participants what we call affective filters. It's not what they need, so they're not interested. And this is often a common problem. It can take different forms, but for example, cascade training would be where the institution, their trainers train the trainers who then pass on a prescribed session to the teacher cohort, for example. It could also be a mass training event where teachers are collected in a large venue and are able to access speakers and so forth. Or indeed, it could be something like an LMS platform where they have digital content which has been created by the parent institution, and there's usually a compulsory element to it, and they also have a time frame which to get that sorted out. What I'd like to do here is share a couple of observations with you. So this is something from Wright and Bolitho. And such rigid structures are often change averse and less likely to embrace different ways of doing things. So they aren't always the best way to go. But I'd also really like to share this observation from a fellow training coordinator in the MENA region. And this is what she said. So her experience really highlights a lack of equality in terms of individual needs being met. But what's the alternative? Well, bottom up is the alternative. And in this case, we can turn the prism on its head. So bottom up is micro approach. So it's individuals who take responsibility for their learning. They usually choose the content and therefore it feels like it's more relevant to them, which in turn leads to insightful development. And one thing I guess we need to really point out is that just because it's individually led doesn't mean that they are in a silo on their own. It usually means there's much more collaboration and support from their own teacher cohort. To share what Farrell says, so really individuals know what they need and will probably go and seek it too. And also what Gusky says. Now this is important. So staying in touch with new developments again promotes alternative ways of facilitating learning, both from a teacher and learner perspective. And just one or two other observations from the literature. This one comes from Wyatt and Onseveska Eger, if I can say that correctly. Or to put it another way, they believe there can be an interface between top down and bottom up. And also to go to Farrell, or in fact, sorry, not Farrell, my dear old MENA training coordinator again. This is a really interesting observation from her. So in other words, institutions need to recognise the benefits of bottom-up approaches and build them into their training frameworks to create and enable learning environments for their teachers. So we really are looking at opportunities where you can bring the two together. And I think finally, I'm just moving something across my screen. So Farrell tells us this. And I think he's echoing what we've just been reading before, and the fact that there really is an opportunity for an interface between the two. So let's just have a look at how we can get more diversification and more equality into teacher training, profession development opportunities. So if we go back to the cascade model, which we know is not perfect, it can still be much more effective. And here are some points I'd like to share. This is from my experience and from the literature too. So we need to avoid being too prescriptive. It's really worth giving the cascade trainers some autonomy and trust. In that way, they will also have more, invest in it, if you like, in what they're going to deliver. So we need to empower our trainers and teachers through personal experience, I think. And come on, let's give them a voice, guys. Our teachers know what they want to learn and develop, so why on earth don't we ask them? This often is such a simple thing to do, and yet for some reason we don't always do it. And then vary the ways we deliver cascade training. So, for example, one of the things that I have tried, and with great success in a number of areas of the MENA region, is to use a carousel method, which is where rather than having a trainer in a room with a set group of participants and they all stay together for the whole series of the training, you move the participants from room to room, which means they meet a different trainer, they have a different training experience, and they tend to stay fresher throughout the whole experience too. This is good because we don't always gel with somebody we're with. So by moving on, the chances are they may then gel with the next trainer. So that can have its benefits too. And this, I think, is really, really key to our learning as trainers or training coordinators. If we want to encourage equality, we need to give every participant the right to have their say. And that way we find out what works, what doesn't work, and how we could do things differently going forward as well. We can also build diversification and equality into things like LMS training or digital training, to put it another way. So, for example, some of what I'm saying here is similar to the previous slide, but here we need to think of using a wide variety of activities because we don't want participants to switch off before they get started. So it's good to mix up the task types, and also remembering if we provide experiences that teachers could mirror or adapt for their own teaching context, that's what we want to be able to do. So if we really want to create an equal playing field for our teachers, then we should ensure they have opportunities to direct their own learning. And I mentioned this, I think, in the previous slide. And point 3, again, let's encourage teachers to share and value what others have to share too. Again, we're back to equality and equal voices. Provide choice in activities. Again, that means that they're more likely to engage. And why not invite them to suggest topical content? And finally, as I mentioned before, we really need to make sure we always encourage feedback. By giving those voices to everybody, we will get good feedback and good ways of improving what we do ourselves. But what do we do about combining top-down and bottom-up teacher PD, which came up in one of my quotations, or two of my quotations earlier on in our look at the literature? So, well, first and foremost, we can set up learning communities. So even as a parent institution, you can still encourage an element of diversification by setting up learning communities throughout your teacher cohort, and then get them to adapt certain roles within it and then change those roles. And by doing that, for example, if you have a learning community leader, that person is much more likely to bring something new to the table, to do something differently, which will once again engage their co-community members. Point number 2. I really think this is a nice way of using the cascade element, if you like, as almost the warmer. So we can start the discussion, the topic in the cascade, and then give them some really meaty, interesting things to go and do within their communities afterwards. And if we provide them with learning challenges, let's not say how they have to do them. Let them work out how they want to actually carry out the challenge. And here's another thing, we don't want to prescribe everything, so why not also enable them to have some topic choice as well? We can guide them, but let's encourage them to think for themselves. And this is something that I think is really powerful, and it works so well, and that is that if they have carried out their action research as part of their learning community activities, why don't we invite them to come and share that during some of our cascade sessions across the rest of the teacher cohort? And finally, sorry, that's disappearing off the bottom of my slide, but if we support learning communities from the top down position, we also need to avoid being prescriptive and stifling. So we need to enable rather than stifle, I think. Okay, I think we're still in time here. So there's a quotation I also wanted to mention here just briefly, and I can't put it on the screen. I'm going to have to reach out to it. It's some from Sahin and Yildirim, who draw attention to the idea of experience. And we know that experience can be a very powerful way to learn too. So they say one effective way of enabling teachers is actually practicing what is preached during staff development seminars. Using participant-based training could trigger self-reflection, enable teachers to empathise with their students, and change their pedagogical beliefs and practical responsibilities respectively. Now, whilst there are times that we have to use a didactic or presentation style event like this one, for example, if we can enable teachers to experience what their learners experience, this has proved time and time again to be much more powerful. It equalises the relationship between teacher and learner and embraces a myriad of options for learning. And so with that in mind, I just wanted to share briefly with you, just before I go, this lovely set of booklets from the UNESCO, which is talking about embracing diversity, particularly creating inclusive, learning-friendly environments. And I'd like you to just have a quick read of this. So I think what I want to pull from this is that if we were to adopt an ILFE, or to say it in its full term, an inclusive learning friendly environment, in our training rooms and let teachers experience an inclusive, learning, friendly environment, then it goes without saying we will be well on our way to promoting diversification and equality. And to wrap up, I've got 5 words to share with you. I'm 15 seconds over, so I better speak fast. So first of all, let's embrace change. Let's use activities to open up experience and make every experience that little bit different. Let's empower our teachers and give them all a voice. Let's encourage equality by valuing everyone's contribution. And let's evaluate their PD and provide feedback that shapes and encourages and refines. Thank you so much, guys, for listening. Here's my reference list, which you will be able to see when it goes up on YouTube. And thank you. And Pete, feel free to email if you want to follow the discussion further. Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jennifer. Very insightful indeed.